They killed her while she slept. The most dangerous creature in the entire Greek mythological cosmos, the entity whose biological output terrorized every civilization from Thebes to Lycia, the mother who nursed monsters against her breast in the dark beneath the earth. They crept up on her in the absolute black of her cave and crushed her skull while she was unconscious. The gods could not face her awake. That is the detail nobody tells you, and once you understand why, the entire story of Greek mythology shifts on its axis. Her name, in the ancient Greek, means she-viper, but a name is a reduction. Echidna was not simply a viper. She was something the cosmos had never produced before and would never produce again. A biomechanical anomaly so perfectly engineered for deception and destruction that the ordered universe of the Olympian gods could only tolerate her existence until it found a moment, a single, unguarded moment, to quietly erase her. She was the biological factory at the foundation of the world's nightmares. And the terrifying thing is that the factory never fully shut down. Her products are still out there. Some of them are still operational. But we need to start at the beginning, because the beginning is a body, and the body is a trap. There is a specific kind of evolutionary adaptation in the natural world called aggressive mimicry, where a predator conceals its true nature behind the appearance of something harmless or desirable. The anglerfish dangles luminescent bait in the abyss. The bolus spider manufactures a chemical that smells exactly like a female moth in heat. The orchid mantis looks so perfectly like a flower petal that bees land on it voluntarily and are consumed before they register the deception. Echidna's design follows this exact principle, but scaled to the proportions of a mythological apex predator, and refined to a precision that the natural world has never managed. Hesiod, the 8th century BCE poet who first documented her in the Theogony, establishes her dual anatomy with clinical precision. The upper half, a nymph, specifically described as possessing glancing eyes, helicopeda in the original Greek, and fair cheeks, caliparion. A nymph in the Greek cosmological framework was not merely a pretty face. She was a localized nature spirit, associated in the ancient mind with pristine wilderness, vulnerability, and the benevolent abundance of the natural world. Nymphs were creatures you moved toward, not away from. They represented safety. The encounter with a nymph was supposed to be the encounter with grace. Echidna's upper structure weaponized every single one of those associations. The glancing eyes are not described as beautiful in the way that Aphrodite's beauty is described, with warmth and invitation. They glance, they track, they lock. The ancient Greek audience would have recognized something in that specific word choice, the sense of a predatory calculation concealed behind an aesthetic surface. The lower half completes the ambush. Below the waist, she terminates in the body of a massive serpent. Terrible, enormous, squirming, Hesiod writes. The word he uses for the serpent, ophis, carries no metaphorical softness in the ancient Greek. It is the word for the thing that moves through the dark earth, the thing that does not breathe with lungs, but absorbs warmth from the stone beneath it, the thing that swallows whole and digests slowly. The serpentine lower mass was built for subterranean locomotion, for the crushing constriction of prey too large to bite, and for the mechanical processing of raw biomass. There is no ceremony in how Echidna feeds. Hesiod uses the term omestes for her feeding methodology, which translates roughly as eating raw flesh. This is not a trivial detail. In the civilized Hellenic world, the cooking of meat and the ritualized offering of burned sacrifices to the gods were the two defining acts that separated human civilization from the animal world. The Greeks did not merely cook meat because they preferred it cooked. They cooked it because the act of cooking was the act of civilization itself. Fire, domesticated and directed, was the marker of the thinking, worshipping, ordered human being. Echidna does not cook. She reduces human culture, human aspiration, human prayer, to a bolus of protein sliding down a serpentine digestive tract in the dark. She is not a monster who hates civilization. She is a mechanism that cannot perceive it. And here is the first detail that the source material never names directly, the one the narrator must surface for you. In the archaeological record of pre-Hellenic Greece, specifically in the linear B tablets from Mycenae and Pylos, the most potent divine figures are not anthropomorphic. They are composite, part human, part animal, part geological feature. The later Greek tradition systematically dismantled these hybrid divinities, rationalizing them, humanizing the gods, making them think and argue and desire like people with enormous power. Echidna is a fossil. She is what the divine looked like before the Olympians imposed their taxonomies, their clean categories, their insistence that a thing must be one kind of thing and not another. She predates logic. Her body is a refutation of it. The Greeks who encountered her in Hesiod's text were not reading about a monster from outside their civilization. They were reading about what their civilization had grown on top of, and what it had not successfully buried. Her cellular structure is described as athanatos kai ageraos, immortal and unaging. She does not suffer senescence. The biological trap she represents is not temporary. It does not erode, does not slow, does not develop the hesitations of age. She is a perpetual motion machine of deception, constriction, and raw digestion. And if you had left her undisturbed in the earth, she would still be there now, waiting, with those glancing eyes trained on the entrance of her cave, and the serpentine coils already shifting in the dark below. But let's talk about the cave, because the cave is where everything happens. And the cave is not what you think it is. Hesiod places her deep down under a hollow rock, far from the deathless gods and mortal men, in a region known as the land of the Arimoi, or Arima. The geographical isolation is not incidental. It is the second layer of the design. The Olympian gods, Hesiod makes clear throughout the theogony, perform their divine authority through visibility. They occupy mountain peaks, the highest visible points in the landscape. They construct shining temples with precise geometric symmetry, structures that project order and rational proportion across the sky. They want to be seen because being seen is how power works in their cosmological framework. Echidna exists in absolute inversion of this model. She is subterranean. She is lightless. She is removed from every access of divine surveillance. The geographer Strabo, working centuries after Hesiod, analyzed the various ancient theories about where Arima actually was and found a consistent pattern. Every proposed location shared the same geological profile: extreme seismic instability, tectonic violence, volcanic activity. The Coretian cave in Cilicia, dark and enormous, the kind of space where the walls sweat and the ground trembles on its own schedule. The island of Pithecusae, sitting on a volcanic field that would eventually produce one of the largest eruptions in European history. A region of Lydia named Katakekamene, which translates directly to the burnt land. This is not coincidence. The ancient imagination located Echidna's womb at the sites where the earth itself was visibly alive, where the ground exhaled sulfurous gas and the rock glowed in the deep. They understood, on some level, that she was not merely living in the earth. She was embedded in it. She was drawing energy from it. Her reproductive systems ran on geothermal heat, on the toxic outgassing of volcanic vents, and the intense thermodynamic pressure of the Earth's crust. The cave of Arima is not a lair. It is a bioreactor. The poet Quintus Smyrnaeus placed her cave close on the borders of eternal night, at the threshold between the physical world and Erebos, the primordial darkness that predates everything. He was identifying something important. Echidna does not live in the world. She lives at the margin of the world, in the zone where the categories that organize existence, living and dead, above and below, light and dark, begin to lose their definitions. She is comfortable in that zone because she herself refuses categorization. She is half-nymph and half-serpent. She is the most beautiful thing you have ever approached, and the last thing you will approach. She is the mother of horrors, who nurses them with what appears to be love. She is the creature that the cosmos could not look at directly. Hesiod describes her cave, with deliberate, bitter irony, as Cluta Domata, her glorious house. There is no glory in Arima. The damp stone presses from every direction. The air tastes of sulfur and slow decay. The warmth is geothermal, not solar. The warmth of compression and deep earth heat, not the warmth of sunlight. And in that total darkness, fueled by the raw caloric energy of consumed travelers, Echidna does what she has always done. She gestates. This is where the story gets complicated. Because Echidna is not merely a predator, she is a factory. And the things she produces are not offspring in any sense we would recognize. They are weapons. But to understand the weapons, you need to understand the genetic material. You need to understand Typhon. And Typhon is something that requires its own accounting. Imagine building something. Not crafting it, not designing it with blueprints and measurements, but something more fundamental than that. Imagine that you are an apex biological system, subterranean, immortal, running on geothermal energy in a lightless cave at the edge of the world, and you have access to the most catastrophically unstable genetic material in existence. Imagine that your offspring are not a product of love or of accident. They are products of a manufacturing process. Each one is a prototype, stress-tested against the vulnerabilities of the living world, and then deployed into it. Imagine that every single one of your children is a biological weapon engineered to attack a specific weakness in human civilization. Now you understand what Echidna was doing in the dark. The genetic contributor was Typhon, and Typhon defies almost every category we apply to mythological beings. He was not a god in the Olympian sense, not a titan in the primordial sense, not a giant in the earthborn sense. He was a cataclysmic force wearing the loose approximation of a body. Hesiod describes him as an entity whose head brushed the stars and whose arms spanned the horizons simultaneously. From each arm extended 100 serpent heads, each one capable of producing a different sound. The roar of a bull, the growl of a lion, the hiss of a serpent, the bark of a dog, and sometimes, most terrifyingly, a sound that resembled the human voice, as if the chaos itself were attempting to impersonate cognition. His lower body, like Echidna's, terminated in serpentine coils. He breathed fire. When he moved across the landscape, the mountains shook. When Zeus finally defeated him and imprisoned him beneath the volcanic mass of Mount Etna, the mountain did not simply sit still above the defeated body. It became Typhon, erupting and trembling with his trapped, endless rage. This is the genetic material that entered Echidna's subterranean womb. Cataclysmic heat, serpentine instability, a body that could produce 100 different predatory forms simultaneously, and a mind, if you can call it that, oriented entirely toward the destruction of divine order. What Echidna did with this material was something more sophisticated than simple reproduction. She refined it. She specialized it. Each offspring represents a distinct vector of attack, a single Highly optimized predatory methodology, stripped of everything unnecessary and amplified to its maximum possible expression. If Typhon was chaos in its raw, undirected form, the Echidna's progeny are chaos with purpose. The first specimen in the catalog, the Lernaean Hydra. And to understand the Hydra, you need to understand where it was cultivated, because the location is not incidental. The swamps of Lerna in the northeastern Peloponnese were understood throughout classical antiquity to be a permeable boundary, a gateway to the underworld. The water there had a particular quality, described in ancient sources as bottomless, which was understood not just geographically, but cosmologically, as a place where the membrane between the living world and the realm of the dead became dangerously thin. The Hydra was not randomly placed there. It was installed there, at the threshold, guarding it. The biology of the Hydra represents the weaponization of cellular regeneration. At the biological core of the organism sat a single immortal cranial appendage, undying and unkillable by any conventional means, surrounded by a cluster of mortal heads. But the mortal heads were not merely a secondary system. They were a trap. When severed by any external force, each amputated cranial appendage immediately triggered an emergency regeneration response at the stump, producing two fully functional replacements from the bleeding tissue. The mathematics of this mechanism are devastatingly simple. A swordsman who successfully removes 5 heads in a single engagement has not weakened the organism. He has given it 5 additional heads. He has made it stronger. He has made it more dangerous. Every conventional act of heroic violence against the Hydra was, in biological terms, an act of involuntary cooperation with the enemy. Furthermore, the Hydra was an ecological weapon. Its exhalations were composed of volatile toxins capable of scorching the earth around it. Its blood and venom were so lethally concentrated that they poisoned waterways on contact, rendering the rivers running from Lerna into the broader Greek agricultural heartland into channels of biological contamination. Any weapon dipped in Hydra blood became a permanently fatal instrument, delivering a wound that could not be healed by any physician or divine intervention. The Hydra was not designed to kill one person. It was designed to collapse the ecosystem around it, transforming a fertile, inhabited region into an uninhabitable, necrotic waste. Echidna did not spawn a predator. She spawned a biological weapon of environmental destruction. The second specimen, the Chimera. And the Chimera is the most audacious piece of biological engineering in the entire catalog, the one that makes you stop and recalibrate your understanding of what Echidna's womb was actually capable of producing. Because the Chimera is not a single organism with unusual features. It is 3 organisms forced into a single body through what the source material can only describe as pure, malignant chthonic force, because no natural biological process could account for what Hesiod describes. A grim-eyed lion in the front, a dragon or serpent at the rear, and from the center of the spine, erupting like a tumor from between the shoulder blades, the head and neck of a goat. 3 distinct metabolisms, 3 distinct nervous systems, 3 distinct sets of predatory instincts, occupying a single body simultaneously, each one oriented in a different direction, each one competing for the shared circulatory and digestive resources of the organism. The sheer metabolic load of keeping this creature alive and functional is staggering. And yet, it was not merely alive. It was devastating. The central goat head operated as a biological ignition system, exhaling what the theogony calls a maiamechaton pyr, the indomitable blazing fire. Consider the internal architecture required to make this possible. A specialized gastric chamber, almost certainly a secondary stomach divorced from the normal digestive pathway, producing and storing highly volatile methane gas. a muscular esophageal valve controlling the release of that gas under pressure. And somewhere in the throat or oral cavity, a biological spark mechanism, perhaps a specialized friction surface, perhaps a chemical ignition system analogous to the one found in bombardier beetles, which mix volatile compounds in a dedicated chamber and eject them at boiling temperatures. The Chimera was deployed into Lycia as a mobile scorched-earth weapon. It could traverse agricultural terrain and reduce it to ash in a systematic sweep. Infrastructure, crops, water supplies, human settlements. The incendiary head made the lion and serpent redundant for most engagements, because by the time the Chimera's teeth and claws were relevant, the fire had already done the strategic work. It was only killed when the hero, Bellerophon, arriving on the winged horse Pegasus from altitude, drove a block of lead mounted on the tip of his spear directly into the fire-breathing maw. The lead melted in the Chimera's own internal heat, flowed down the esophageal tract, and sealed the gas chamber from the inside, suffocating the biological ignition system, and with it, the organism's capacity for violence. Bellerophon did not overpower the Chimera. He weaponized its own internal thermodynamics against it. He turned the factory against itself. It was an elegant solution, but the fact that it was necessary, that no direct assault could have worked, tells you something precise about the level of biological engineering Echidna had achieved. Third specimen, the Sphinx. And here, Echidna's evolutionary logic takes a turn that even the Hydra and the Chimera did not prepare you for. Because the Sphinx is not a physical weapon. Not primarily. She is a psychological weapon. She is Echidna's most refined specimen, the one that demonstrates a terrifying leap in the sophistication of the manufacturing process, because the Sphinx was engineered to kill with language. The body. A muscular lion, built for power and speed, and the crushing inevitability of a large feline ambush. The wings. An eagle, granting aerial mobility, surveillance from altitude, the capacity to drop onto prey from above with the force of a living missile. And the head. A human female, capable of speech, of syntax, of the construction and delivery of a complex cognitive trap. She was deployed to the city of Thebes, not to the wilderness, not to a marsh or a mountain pass, but to a city. A human settlement, the center of civilization and discourse and communal thought. She positioned herself at the gates of Thebes, and she waited. She did not hunt based on physical weakness. She hunted based on intellectual failure. Every traveler who approached the city gates encountered the same test, a riddle about the nature of man, about what walks on 4 legs at dawn, 2 legs at midday, and 3 legs at dusk. The answer being the human being itself, moving through the stages of a life. Those who failed the riddle, those who suffered what the clinical framework can only describe as cognitive dissonance, those who could not hold the multiple temporal layers of the question in simultaneous suspension, were immediately strangled and consumed. The Sphinx was not testing knowledge. She was testing a specific cognitive flexibility, the capacity to think about the self across time, to understand the human body as a process rather than a fixed form. Those who failed this test were, by the Sphinx's assessment, insufficiently human, and insufficiently human meant eligible for consumption. This is Echidna's most insidious innovation. The Hydra and the Chimera attacked from outside. The Sphinx installed herself at the threshold of civilization and forced human beings to confront the limits of their own minds before she destroyed them. She was a predator that used the human capacity for language and abstract thought as the mechanism of the kill. Not a trap made of claws or fire or poison, but a trap made of words, delivered in the grammar and syntax of a creature with a human face. The fourth specimen is the Nemean lion, and its strategic function is almost brutally simple compared to the Sphinx. The Nemean lion possessed a single biological innovation. Its hide was completely impervious to mortal weaponry. Not resistant, not difficult to penetrate. Impervious. The sharpest bronze swords in the Mycenaean arsenal bent against it. Iron spears shattered. Stone arrows skipped off the fur like pebbles off granite. The creature's golden coat, dense and rigid at the cellular level, represented a complete nullification of the metallurgical technology that human civilization had spent centuries developing. The entire progression of human martial capability, from stone to bronze to iron, was rendered irrelevant by a single mutation in dermal composition. The strategic target was not individual humans. It was the confidence of human civilization in its own tools. The Nemean lion did not merely kill. It demonstrated, with every failed sword stroke and every shattered spear, that the technological gap between humanity and the natural world was an illusion. The only way to kill it was to go backward, to abandon the tools, to use the brute, pre-technological force of bare hands, which is exactly what Heracles was required to do, grappling the creature into submission with his own body and strangling it from within the impenetrable shell of its own hide. Echidna's fourth specimen forced the most celebrated hero in Greek mythology to regress to a biological state before civilization. That was the point. Fifth and final specimen in the core catalog, Cerberus, the Hound of Hades. And Cerberus represents the most specialized deployment in the entire lineup, because Cerberus was not designed to roam the living world. He was designed for perimeter defense. Aggressive polycephaly, the multiplication of cranial structures, is the defining biological feature. Multiple heads mean multiple sensory arrays, eyes and ears and olfactory receptors distributed across different angles simultaneously, producing a surveillance system with 0 blind spots and no dormant sectors. He's stationed at the gate of the underworld, and his behavioral protocols are as precisely engineered as his anatomy, welcoming to those entering the realm of the dead, because the dead are the correct flow of traffic. They are moving in the right direction. They are conforming to the natural order. But the moment any soul attempts to move in the wrong direction, to return from death to life, the aggressive protocols activate instantly. Cerberus is not a guard dog in the traditional sense. He is a biological firewall. He does not prevent entry, he prevents exit. He maintains the integrity of the boundary between what is alive and what is not. Echidna's output, in its totality, represents a comprehensive strategic attack on every layer of the human condition. The Hydra targets the environment and the water supply. The Chimera targets the agricultural infrastructure and the built environment. The Sphinx targets the rational mind and the psychic architecture of self-understanding. The Nemean lion targets the confidence of human technology. Cerberus targets the existential certainty that death is a one-way threshold. There is no element of human civilization that Echidna's womb left unaddressed. She was not producing monsters. She was producing a curriculum of human destruction, each lesson specialized, each lesson lethal. Each one targeting a different vulnerability in the elaborate, fragile structure that human beings had built on top of the ancient Earth. But there is one weapon missing from the standard catalog, the one the scholars and the mythographers tend to mention last, if at all. The one that operates not through toxicity or fire or cognitive paralysis, but through an inversion so complete and so disturbing that the Greeks could barely look at it directly. Echidna herself, as a mother. Because the most devastating thing she ever produced was not the Hydra or the Chimera. It was the concept she embodied, the possibility she represented. And that is the subject of the final part of this story. There is a specific horror that the Greek mythological tradition returns to again and again across centuries of texts and vases and friezes and plays. The horror of the mother who should love and does not. Medea, who destroys her own children to punish a faithless husband. Agave, who tears her own son apart in a Dionysian frenzy and carries his head home, believing it to be a lion's prize. Hera, who throws the crippled infant Hephaestus from the heights of Olympus simply because his body is imperfect. The Greek cosmos is not short on maternal horror. But all of these figures represent the failure of maternal love, the perversion of the instinct, the collapse of the bond under the pressure of passion, pride, or madness. Echidna is something categorically different. Because Echidna does not fail at maternal love, she succeeds at it. She is, by every available account, a devoted and functional mother to her progeny. She nurtures them in the dark of Arima. She sustains them with the caloric energy of consumed travelers. She produces them continuously, tirelessly, without pause or exhaustion or grief. Her maternal dedication is total. The horror of Echidna is not the horror of the mother who fails her children. It is the horror of the mother who succeeds in raising abominations. Consider what this does to the archetype. In the Greek cosmological framework, the mother is the guarantor of continuity and sustenance. Gaia, the primordial earth, is the bedrock upon which all life rests. Demeter produces the harvest, the grain that feeds civilization, the seasonal abundance that allows human communities to survive the winter, to plan, to build, to persist. The maternal principle in Greek theology is the principle of life renewed, of the world fed and maintained and carried forward into the next generation. What Echidna does with this same principle, this same fierce, unconditional, sacrificial devotion of a mother to her offspring, is redirected entirely toward the production of death. Where Demeter produces grain, Echidna produces the Hydra. Where Gaia sustains the ecosystem, Echidna deploys the Chimera. The maternal energy is identical. The output is opposite. She is not the inversion of motherhood. She is motherhood applied to the wrong objects, the way a perfectly functional immune system, turned against the body's own tissue, produces autoimmune devastation rather than protection. And here is the psychological implication that the source material never surfaces directly. Echidna loved what she made. Not in the human, conscious, emotionally legible way, but in the way that all mothers in the Greek cosmos love, with a territorial, protective, biological ferocity that does not ask whether the object of devotion is worthy of that devotion. The Olympian gods frequently rejected, punished, or destroyed their monstrous offspring. Hera threw Hephaestus from Olympus. Zeus sealed Typhon beneath a mountain. The divine machinery of the ordered cosmos was constantly editing its own output, removing the imperfect, the excessive, the categorically threatening. Echidna never edited. She embraced everything the union with Typhon produced, every genetic experiment, every biological anomaly, every nightmare that the chaotic raw material of a cataclysmic storm god could express through her womb. She was the patron saint of the rejected and the terrible. She was the mother that outcasts have always wanted, and the ordered world has always feared. The figure who loves without conditions, who accepts without categories, who nurtures whatever arrives, regardless of how it is received by the world above. This is why the gods could not simply ignore her. Not because she was producing monsters. The gods handled monsters. Heracles existed precisely for that purpose, a biological and spiritual instrument designed to seek and destroy Echidna's output across the Greek landscape. But the heroes could kill the products. They could not kill the producer. They could drain the factory's current inventory. They could not shut down the factory. And the factory was immortal. And the factory was unaging. And the factory was still there, in the sulphurous dark of Arima, with those glancing eyes reflecting the geothermal glow, and the serpentine coils already shifting in preparation for the next gestational cycle. So Hera, queen of the Olympians, made a decision. And the decision tells you everything you need to know about the actual power dynamics of the Greek cosmos. She did not send Heracles. Heracles was for the products, not the source. She did not declare open war. Open war with Echidna was not a calculation that returned a favorable outcome. What Hera did was identify the one operative in the divine arsenal capable of the specific kind of work the situation required. She sent Argus Panoptes. Argus Panoptes is typically described in terms of his most spectacular feature, the 100 eyes distributed across his body. But reduce the mythology and focus on the operational profile. Argus was an earth-born giant, which meant his strength was geological, the strength of compressed stone and deep earth pressure, rather than the athletic dynamism of Olympian heroes. More importantly, he did not sleep. All 100 eyes could not close simultaneously. While 99 eyes rested, one remained open. While 98 rested, two remained open. He maintained continuous, uninterrupted sensory awareness of his environment. He was the ultimate instrument of surveillance, an unsleeping watcher with 360-degree coverage, immune to the surprise attack that ended so many divine operatives. He was, in the operational sense, unambushable. And yet, Apollodorus in the Bibliotheca records the event with a brevity that is almost clinical in its understatement. Argus Panoptes slew Echidna only while she slept. The 100 eyes did not face the glancing eyes while they were open. The unsleeping watcher waited in the sulphurous dark of Arima, in the geothermal heat, navigating the tunnels that led to her cave with complete sensory awareness of every direction except the one that mattered, the one where Echidna herself lay dormant, for the one moment when the biological factory was not operational. And in that moment, he struck. Think about what this means. Argus Panoptes was the most formidable operative available to the queen of the Olympian gods. He possessed 100 eyes that could not all sleep simultaneously, the strength of an earth-born giant, and the tracking capabilities of a divine surveillance system. He infiltrated the most hostile geological environment in the Greek cosmos, a subterranean volcanic bioreactor at the threshold of the underworld. He navigated the sulphurous, lightless tunnels to the precise location of the most dangerous creature in the mythological universe. And then, he waited. He waited for her to become unconscious. He waited for the predator, the immortal, ageless, perfect biological ambush that had been operating continuously since before the Olympian gods organized their hierarchy, to become temporarily inert. And only then, only in that specific window of vulnerability, did the 100-eyed giant of the gods dare to raise his hand against her. The implication is unambiguous. The gods sent their best operative, equipped him with surveillance capabilities that no other agent possessed, gave him the tactical advantage of a dark, subterranean environment where no witnesses could observe the act, and he still would not face her while she was awake. Not because of a tactical miscalculation, because she was too dangerous. Because the risk of failure, the risk of those glancing eyes opening in the dark and finding the 100-eyed giant crouched above her before the strike could land, was a risk that the gods calculated as unacceptable. The ordered cosmos of the Olympians, shining temples and rational hierarchies, and heroic narratives of martial triumph, could not conquer the archaic, chthonic terror of the mother of monsters through any means available to it, except a quiet, careful, cowardly murder in the absolute dark. They killed her while she slept, not because they were evil, because they were afraid. And the factory, shut down by a single assassination in the dark, had already done its work. The progeny were out there. They were operational. The Hydra had contaminated Lerna. The Chimera had scorched Lycia. The Sphinx had colonized the gates of Thebes. The Nemean lion had demonstrated the obsolescence of human weaponry. Cerberus was already stationed at his post, fawning on the dead and devouring the living who tried to return. You can kill the mother. You cannot unmake what the mother made. There is a structural irony embedded in the entire arc of this story that only becomes visible from a certain distance. Every creature that Echidna produced was eventually neutralized by a hero. Heracles killed the Hydra and the Nemean lion. Bellerophon killed the Chimera. Oedipus solved the Sphinx's riddle and drove her to self-destruction. Orpheus, Heracles, Psyche, each of them in their own time found a way past Cerberus. The heroes of the Greek tradition accumulated their reputations by systematically dismantling Echidna's catalog. Every labor, every quest, every heroic narrative that gave Greek civilization its sense of itself as ordered and triumphant over chaos was built on the body of something Echidna made. Remove her progeny from the Greek mythological record, and Heracles has no labors. Bellerophon has no quest. Oedipus has no riddle to solve and no city to enter, and no terrible recognition to arrive at. The entire architecture of the heroic tradition, the structure that defined what it meant to be brave and strong and worthy in the Hellenic world, exists because Echidna built the obstacles that the heroes would measure themselves against. She did not threaten civilization. She produced it. The heroes needed the monsters more than the monsters needed the heroes. And the greatest monster of all was the mother, the dark and devoted and perfectly functioning mother in the cave beneath the burnt land, who loved her children unconditionally and released them into a world that would fear them and chase them and eventually kill them. She knew this. She had to know this, and she made them anyway. She made them beautifully and completely and without hesitation, every time. Here is what that means for you, the person watching this video. Because you know someone like Echidna, not someone with a serpentine lower body nested in a geothermal cave, but someone who creates, relentlessly and without rest, things the world is not prepared to receive. Someone whose output is too large, too strange, too specific in its design to be understood by the people who encounter it in the world above. Someone whose love for what they make is total and unconditional and has never once asked whether what they make will be loved in return. You know the feeling of making something that the ordered, symmetrical, reasonable world looks at with fear and sends its hundred-eyed agents to quietly eliminate in the dark. And if you do not know that feeling personally, you know someone who does. And the question you are left with is this. If Echidna, knowing that every single creature she built would eventually be hunted down and killed by the civilization above her, continued to build, continued to gestate, continued to produce her terrifying, specialized, devastating children in the dark of Arima, and release them into the light one by one. Was that an act of futility? Or was it the only act of genuine defiance available to something too large to exist in the world above? Was Echidna a monster who threatened the order of the gods? Or was she the architect of that order, the dark necessity against which the bright heroes could define themselves, the inescapable foundation that civilization was built on top of and could not acknowledge, and could only kill once, quietly, in the dark, while she was sleeping? There is one thread in this story that the ancient texts raise and never resolve: the location of Arima, the cave. Hesiod places her there and describes it with architectural specificity: the hollow rock, the depth beneath the earth, the isolation from gods and men.
But nowhere in the ancient record does anyone describe finding the cave after her death.
Argus descended, Argus struck. And then, in the texts, there is silence. The cave of Arima remains. The geothermal vents still exhale. The volcanic rock still glows in the deep earth. And Echidna's children are still out there, in forms we have renamed but not yet fully understood. The question is not whether the factory shut down when the mother died. The question is what it was building in the centuries of darkness between then and now, and whether we would recognize the products if they walked past us in the light.